You know, there's a saying when it comes to politics that the trouble with standing in the middle of the road is that you get hit by traffic from both sides. And that is a saying that I very much empathize with as a YouTuber who tries my best to approach every topic on geopolitics objectively and not allowing my views to be overly influenced by bias from one side of the political spectrum or the other. Because of that, I find myself constantly attacked by people on both the right and the left, which to me I wear as sort of a badge of honor. Because if both sides attack me for the same position, that tells me I am doing a sufficient job of actually doing, to the best of my ability, all I can to pay attention to the facts rather than what other people are telling me to think. And today's video is going to be no exception. This is going to be a video where I get hit by traffic from both sides. What I want to talk about today is a major inconsistency that myself and many others have noticed in Donald Trump's foreign policies, where he says one thing in regards to one section of the world, Europe, and does another thing in another section of the world, the Middle East. And this inconsistency is even further than just that. The inconsistency also has to do with Donald Trump's own actions to defend American trade in one area, while undermining that trade at the same time through economic policies back at home, namely tariffs. There's a whole lot of inconsistency to dive into, so let's get right into it. The main inconsistencies I want to point out today have to do with Donald Trump's administration's recent decision to bomb Houthi militants in Yemen, which, when you look closely, is the Trump administration doing exactly what they are encouraging Ukraine not to do, which is going to war with their adversaries rather than talking to them. Of course, we all know that in recent months, Donald Trump has been making big efforts essentially to force Ukraine to sit down at the peace table with Russia. Because according to Trump, he cares so much about human life and doesn't want to see new wars provoked or started or escalated. He just wants people to arrive at agreements. And yet at the same time, we see Donald Trump jumping straight to bombing Houthi militants rather than sitting down at the table and talking with them. Even more, the inconsistency really opens up when you realize that the geopolitical reason Donald Trump is bombing Houthi militants in Yemen right now is to protect American trade interests militarily, while at home, Donald Trump is attacking the very same trade interests through tariffs. Now, there's a whole lot of confusion as to why Donald Trump is taking two separate streams of actions here. And let me just say at the forefront of this video that while obviously I have my own perspective, everybody does, the goal of this video is not necessarily to portray my perspective. And so I will try my best to subdue that, though it will, of course, leak out. I am entitled to my perspective, but so are you, and so I don't want to beat you down with my thoughts. Instead, my goal here is really just to poke and probe at these inconsistencies and hopefully to convince more people to do the hard work of arriving at a consistent political position rather than just jumping on political tribalism, which I think is part of the reason for a lot of the problems that we see in the world today. So let's get into it. So first, what is the factual background behind today's discussion with the United States deciding to bomb targets within Yemen? Well, the background really comes down to global trade that travels through the Suez Canal. If you look at a world map, what you will notice is that global trade routes, while they are very vast and cover thousands and thousands of miles, thousands and thousands of kilometers, ultimately, global trade is controlled by a really small number of choke points that make it easy to decide who comes through that choke point and therefore who is allowed to trade with whom. These choke points have always been critically important, particularly to the United States. And for that reason, the United States has made an effort to have a massive military presence around each of the choke points so that they can ensure global trade continues unabated by pirates or by hostile actors. Now, one of these choke points sits to the southeast of the Red Sea between the Suez Canal and the Gulf of Aden. And this choke point, on both sides of this choke point, sits Yemen. Inside of Yemen are Houthi militants who are aligned with Hamas ideologically and aligned with Iran ideologically. And after Hamas invaded Israel back in 2023, and Israel retaliated by invading Gaza, Houthi militants decided to start attacking global shipping within this choke point to basically prevent countries that supported Israel from prospering from their trade. It was the most disruptive act they could possibly take, and even though they are relatively small, not really powerful by conventional military methods, it allowed them to make a massive disruption. Now, the reason the Houthis were so disruptive is because approximately 1/8 of all global trade goes through this choke point on its way to the Suez Canal. And especially for the United States, a lot of the trade that they get from Asia, although more Asian trade goes over the Pacific, a lot of the trade the United States gets from Asia comes through this choke point. And particularly, a lot of the trade that the United States gets from India and Pakistan and Africa comes through this choke point. So the United States couldn't let the Houthis get away with what they were doing. Even though this territory is not U.S. land, the U.S. decided that they had an interest in this territory. That's going to be important in a minute. And they decided to retaliate against the Houthis and take military action against them to protect the shipping through this corridor. Now, that is the setup. After Israel and Hamas reached a ceasefire a couple of months ago, though, the Houthis agreed to stop attacking global trade in conjunction with that ceasefire. And for the most part, they have kept their word on this from what I can tell from my research. It seems that the Houthis have not attacked any additional trading vessels that have been coming through the Red Sea, but the Houthis have been attacking some military targets, American military targets. Now, one could argue, and I don't know either way, but one could argue because these attacks have been so small in scale and so limited that this wasn't an actual effort by the Houthis as an organization, but it was rather the effort of radicalized Houthis who didn't want to stop attacking the United States. But in either case, the Houthis did in fact continue to attack U.S. vessels after the ceasefire, and that is what led to this week Donald Trump deciding to bomb the Houthi leaders in retaliation. Now, this is a point in the narrative where it's important that I not put words in people's mouths, but instead that I actually use their own words. So, in order to explain why the United States attacked the Houthis, I want to read an actual post from Donald Trump on Truth Social about this, which reads like this. Today, I have ordered the United States military to launch decisive and powerful military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. They have waged an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism against America and other ships, aircraft, and drones. The post continues, to Iran, support for the Houthi terrorists must end immediately. Do not threaten the American people. Their president, who has received one of the largest mandates in presidential history, or worldwide shipping lanes. If you do, beware, because America will hold you fully accountable. Now, when you read that statement, what you have to ask is, why did Donald Trump choose to take military action against the Houthis instead of negotiating with them and instead of talking to them? And when you examine it, you realize that it's the same reasons that people who are pro-Ukraine have been saying that Ukraine is not yet in a position to just talk to Russia to solve their problems. The reality is that talking with the Houthis is probably not going to get the United States anywhere. At least from their perspective, there is a ceasefire. The Houthis have violated that ceasefire. And so now they're within their rights to take military action. They don't need to negotiate. But by the same token, Ukraine has had 25 different ceasefires with Russia, all of which Russia has broken. And so you can see why Ukraine might not want a ceasefire with Russia under such circumstances. Again, here is a major inconsistency. Now, another major inconsistency arises when you read the end of that Truth Social post, which was not targeted towards the Houthis, but instead towards Iran. And most analysts who are looking at this situation basically see these attacks and this message to Iran as kind of the opening statement in Trump's negotiations with Iran over a new nuclear deal. And the reason that is inconsistent is because Donald Trump is telling Ukraine to stop military action and just sit down and talk with Russia, while when it comes to the United States wanting to negotiate a deal with Iran, what they do is they start military action to put themselves in a stronger negotiating position. And whatever side you take, you have to admit it's inconsistent. Now, a key factor here is that the United States is not defending U.S. territory, and they are not defending actual American citizens. They are only defending U.S. interests. Now, you could argue they are defending American citizens in the form of soldiers, and that's technically true, but the reality is also that another way for the Americans to defend those citizens is simply to pull them out of the area. I'm not saying that's what I'm recommending. I'm trying to point out a line of logic here. The reason the United States is taking military action to defend these American soldiers, rather than pulling the soldiers out, is because even though this piece of territory is not on American land, they see it as in America's interests to defend this piece of land. Now, the reality is that the more you dissect this and pull it apart, you realize that all of the same core reasons that the United States is taking military action against the Houthis and Iran are core reasons for why the United States should also be willing to militarily support and defend Ukraine. And so what are some of the possible reasons for the inconsistency? I think that when you really look at it, the major difference that you find between the Houthis in the Middle East and the Russians who are attacking Ukraine is that the Russians are much bigger, much stronger, and much scarier. And lately, the United States seems to be very willing to take military action against small targets that they know they can defeat, but not against big targets that they are scared of for one reason or another, nuclear warfare or just high costs. What we find when examining not just this situation, but a lot of situations in recent U.S. history, is that even if the logic for the war remains the same, even if the ideological and the moral reasons are the same, the willingness of the United States to engage in war isn't based on ideological or moral reasons. It's not even based on just its own interests. It is based on how risky it perceives the war to be. Now, to me, that is concerning, because that is not how the leader of the free world behaves, as America often tries to portray itself. That is how an empire behaves, where things aren't being filtered through what is right and what is wrong, but instead what is convenient, what is expedient, what seems profitable. In the case of the United States pushing for peace in Ukraine while pushing for war with the Houthis and with Iran, we see that the United States is not fighting because they believe their ideology is superior, or even because they believe a cause is moral and worth fighting for, but instead they're simply fighting for incremental economic benefit and incremental power. As it stands, because it doesn't seem to be based any longer on a consistent ideology, America's foreign policy is based on looking strong and maybe even being strong, but neglecting the value of using that strength in the areas that really matter. We will use our strength when it is easy, when it is convenient, but when it is actually important that we use our strength, it shows that we are perfectly willing to back out if it seems too scary for us. By attacking the Houthis, what America is showing is that they still view themselves as some kind of a global policeman and that they want to continue in that role. But by not helping Ukraine for the same reasons, what we see is a policeman who selectively enforces the law. A policeman who enforces the law when the criminal is a small, scrawny guy that they can easily overpower, but who runs away when a big, strong guy is their opponent. And the value of that kind of a policeman is limited at best. So with all of this in mind, and with the inconsistency pointed out, what do I think the United States should do? What is some advice that I can give? Should we move more towards consistency with what we're doing with the Houthis and take that to Ukraine? Or should we move more towards consistency with what we're doing around Ukraine and move in that direction with the Houthis? Obviously, I have my own opinions, and so will everybody else. I think we can all agree that at least at a very minimum, the United States should be consistent. So here is my advice. If Trump really believes in what he is doing with the Houthis, he should apply the same logic to helping Ukraine against Russia, and he should get fully behind Ukraine. But if Trump really believes in what he's doing to try to create peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, he should apply the same logic to the Houthis and Iran and talk to them instead of attacking them. Now, if we want America to be America first and to be isolationist in regards to Ukraine, we probably should be the same way when it comes to Israel and the Gulf states. And to be clear, I'm not arguing for isolationism. I'm just arguing at a minimum for coherence and consistency. By the way, this also applies to outside observers of the U.S. too, just to be fair. If people want the U.S. to take action to defend its own interest and its own ideology throughout the world by intervening in Ukraine, they should also understand when the U.S. takes similar action in other theaters of the world, that's only fair as well. You can't use us when you want us and hate us when you don't. That's not helpful either. Now, it's getting dark, so let me try to close. If Trump really believes America is better off isolating itself from most foreign trade to protect our own industries, and we're better off giving it a go on our own, maybe we should also isolate ourselves from this foreign war with the Houthis aimed at defending our global trading interests. But if Trump believes this foreign war is worthwhile to protect American trade, then he should probably protect American trade not just militarily, but also economically by removing threats of tariffs and embracing free trade. Now, of course, everybody is entitled to their own opinion as to where they land on all of those suggestions. But I would just encourage everybody with this. Do your homework. Land on a position that you can be proud of and that you can stand solidly on, that's backed by research and facts and your own personal moral beliefs. And then stand on that consistently. Don't just stand for one political party or the other, but know the moral framework behind your thinking and hold to it consistently, and encourage your politicians to hold to their views consistently as well. Because again, when we're just making decisions based on convenience and not firmly held internal beliefs, that's where we can really get into a lot of trouble. With that in mind, it's getting dark. I gotta close. But before you go, can I ask you for a quick favor? If you enjoyed this discussion, it's rare to have politically moderate, center-of-the-road discussions. And of course, as I said, the trouble with standing in the middle of the road is that you get hit by traffic from both sides. So if you appreciated this discussion, the reason it's so rare is because most people have to ascribe to a certain view for their audience or for the organization that they work for. But I am an independent analyst. I don't draw my salary from a newspaper. I don't draw my salary from an organization. And that gives me a lot of freedom to speak my own mind, which I hope helps us arrive at better conclusions. If you appreciate that, would you consider becoming a patron and supporting this channel? It's completely voluntary. It's just a way for people who want to support the channel to have an avenue to do so. With that in mind, you can find out more about that by scanning the QR code on screen or visiting the link in the description of this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.